Do you realize how incredible this is?
January 3rd, 2023 marks the 30th anniversary of my favorite show of all time, Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And I would like to mark that anniversary by talking about the pilot episode that premiered January 3rd, 1993, Emissary.
Ironic. One who does not wish to be among us is to be the emissary.
If you have not seen Emissary, I highly recommend that you watch it now. I'm not really going to go through the plot. I'm just going to kind of talk about the best parts of the episode, the things that I really like about it, and why I think that it's easily the best pilot of any Star Trek series, and also one of my favorite episodes of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Maybe not in my top 10, but it's a very good episode of television.
I strongly suggest you do not proceed.
Perhaps most importantly, Deep Space Nine was a very well-planned pilot. They did just about everything right in the move to include Deep Space Nine in a universe where Star Trek The Next Generation was still going on. This series was going to focus on Bajorans, Cardassians, and Ferengi. Even though these had been introduced in The Next Generation, all of these races were going to be fleshed out more than they possibly could have been on Next Generation due to the sheer volume of episodes in which these races were going to be the primary protagonists or antagonists. Bringing on Chief O'Brien to Deep Space Nine was a brilliant move. It gave us a touch of someone we knew from The Next Generation without disrupting the cast so much that we focused on a character that we already knew a lot about. We know a bit about Chief O'Brien. We knew that he was married, that he worked in the transporter room, that he had issues with the Cardassians, but really other than that, we don't know too much about Chief O'Brien. And so bringing him on as a primary character was a wonderful decision on the part of the creators.
We've got to close that gap in the field, or we'll tear ourselves into a million pieces.
In the first episode, we get a really good sense of the histories that characters share together. You have Sisko and Dax, who have a history of Sisko and Curzon.
This is going to take some getting used to.
Don't be ridiculous. I'm still the same old Dax, more or less.
You have Sisko and Picard have a history of battle, that they've met in battle at Wolf 359, that Sisko holds Picard responsible for the death of his wife. We have a history between Odo and Dukat.
Perhaps they will be less hostile to Cardassians than to humans.
Dukat, these people are trying to save you from a lot of trouble.
And we have a history between Odo and Quark.
The man is a gambler and a thief.
I'm not a thief.
You are a thief.
So right at the beginning of Deep Space Nine, we get a sense that these characters have backstories that we don't know about that are going to be fleshed out as we move through the series. Most notably, Odo and Quark and Dax and Sisko.
I'd been worried about you.
It's good to see you too, old man.
This episode also strikes a good balance of old and new with the discovery of the wormhole. We can have all of our old Next Generation races and aliens from the Alpha Quadrant. We can also have new alien races that we're going to meet from the other side of the Gamma Quadrant. And so we're going to get the best of both worlds in a way that other series couldn't really do. The other thing about this well-planned episode is that right at the beginning, almost every guest actor in this episode has to play two different characters. In fact, Patrick Stewart plays 3 different characters in this episode. He plays Jean-Luc Picard. He plays Jean-Luc Picard as Locutus of Borg. And he plays one of the prophets. And many of the other episodes, many of the other characters play one of the prophets as well. And so these actors in a single workday are having to play both a brand new character and another character in the first episode of this brand new TV show.
It is inconceivable that any species could exist in such a manner.
And it really shows just how much care was put together with the pilot for Star Trek Deep Space Nine. They really cared that this episode go extremely well. I also want to talk about the well-chosen Emissary. I want to talk about the terrific performance given in this episode by Avery Brooks. Several times in this episode, Avery Brooks gives goofy looks that by the time that the 5th and 6th seasons of Deep Space Nine roll around, the goofiness of Sisko kind of fades in the background. But in Emissary, Sisko has some very goofy looks that he gives. He gives a goofy look to Quark, he gives a goofy look to the steps, and he gives a really goofy look to Dukat, as well as another goofy look right after Dukat leaves his office. Avery Brooks as Sisko does a wonderful job of giving us someone that we can relate to.
Okay.
Okay.
This episode shows a lot of humanity in the way that Sisko and Jake interact as father and son, and Avery Brooks plays it off like he is Sirach Lofton's father. Avery Brooks delivers a truly heartbreaking performance in this episode.
Damn it! We just can't leave her here!
We get to see the way that he emotes over the loss of his wife and how he hasn't ever really dealt with her. He didn't ever have the chance to grieve. And we get to finally see him grieve in the scene where he explains to the prophets that he has been living a non-linear existence, that he has been living aboard the ship that was destroyed.
You exist here.
I exist here.
Reviewing this episode was very difficult for me because I was watching specifically for Avery Brooks' performance, and one of the deepest moments in that performance for me was when Sisko is watching with the alien, watching the retelling of his engagement to Jennifer Sisko. Sisko and Jennifer exchange lines about domestic inquiries and eventually kiss, which is going to signal their engagement to be married. But Sisko can't even watch this scene take place. He is having difficulty reliving these moments because all they do, even the good moments, just remind him that his wife is gone. And Avery Brooks' portrayal of this throughout the episode is one of the best performances of any actor across all the series of Star Trek.
Every time I close my eyes, in the darkness, in the blink of an eye, I see her like this.
More than Brooks' performance, I also really like the character of Benjamin Sisko. He is a great Starfleet officer. He does have his reservations about this assignment, and he does have a problem with Jean-Luc Picard, but other than that, he makes just about every right decision in this episode.
We need someone to step forward and say, I'm staying. I'm rebuilding. We need a community leader, and it's going to be you, Quark.
He finds a way to blackmail Quark into staying aboard the station, and we get to see that he quickly reignites that spark that the promenade needed for people to maybe start to come back to Deep Space Nine and be involved in what they're trying to do there. And so Sisko is going to be a good leader for Deep Space Nine. Sisko will do well in his position. He asks for a Bajoran national to be his first officer. He takes advice from Kira as to what she thinks should happen, and he follows it very quickly by going and meeting with the Kai to determine what needs to be done to prevent a Bajoran civil war.
What happens to Bajor then?
Civil war.
Sisko also has to explain to the aliens why he is not a threat to them, and he has to show them his humanity, what makes humans special.
My species respects life above all else. Can you say the same?
He talks about the sum of our experiences, he talks about competition for fun, he talks about physical pleasure, and he especially talks about loss, moving from one moment to the next. I love when he explains that moment to moment they don't know what's going to happen, and Jennifer says that the Jennifer Prophet says that it's inconceivable that any species could exist this way.
It is inconceivable that any species could exist in such a manner.
Sisko has to explain linear corporeal existence to non-linear, non-corporeal aliens, and he is making first contact with this species and does a good job.
That is the nature of linear existence. And if you examine it more closely, you will see that you do not need to fear me.
I also want to talk about the well-made script. This is a basically perfect episode of television and of Star Trek. And one of the things that this episode does right from the very beginning is the scene between Sisko and Picard. There are a lot of briefings in Star Trek The Next Generation and in other incarnations of Star Trek. There are a lot of briefings, but most of them are fairly benign. Usually an admiral or a guest character is delivering information, and that's what happens in this episode. We get special guest star Patrick Stewart is delivering a briefing to Sisko on being the new head of this Bajoran space station.
Welcome to Bajor.
But this episode does not have a standard briefing. Instead, we get an additional layer put on each of these characters. Sisko immediately confronts Picard because he's upset that Picard was the person who led the Borg in the battle that killed his wife.
We met before. Yes, sir. We met in battle.
He does not pull any punches with Picard about how he feels about this. And so Sisko starts the briefing angry. And I want to counter this with just about every other character in this episode. Sisko has no problem with anyone else. He's very friendly, outgoing, energetic. He wants to learn from everybody else except for Picard, because he blames Picard for what happened with his wife. And so Sisko plays the scene with a level of anger throughout. Picard, on the other hand, is the receiver of this information, and it throws Patrick Stewart's portrayal of Picard, it throws Picard a little off balance. Picard shows regret and shame and remorse and does a really great job of being on the defensive and out of balance in this conversation with his subordinate, in fact. Even though Sisko comes in and takes over the conversation and, in effect, stops the conversation from happening. He interrupts Picard and leaves. And so Picard also has his authority taken from him by Sisko.
In the meantime, however... In the meantime, I will do the job I've been ordered to do to the best of my ability, sir.
And so this scene is just a wonderful example of how Deep Space Nine is going to not just give us our standard Star Trek that we've always had, but they're going to attempt to put layers into each scene that they put together.
Computer, you and I need to have a little talk.
This episode has some of my favorite lines in the entire series. I love when Odo explains his first impressions to Sisko and how they've changed.
You know, at first, I didn't think I was going to like him.
I love when Dukat isn't quite sure how to move around in the office that was his just a couple weeks ago.
Excuse my presumption, but this was my office only 2 weeks ago.
I love when Sisko describes baseball to the aliens, and then immediately the aliens are not quite sure how to take this, and they insult Sisko.
In fact, the game wouldn't be worth playing if we knew what was going to happen.
You value your ignorance of what is to come?
I love when the Jennifer prophet tells Sisko,
None of your past experiences help prepare you for this consequence.
I love that this episode has probably the most alien aliens in all of Star Trek. But the aliens, even though they're non-linear and non-corporeal, they aren't just aliens that exist in this episode isolated from anything. They are part of the story. Sisko is trying to explain that he is part of a linear species.
The rules aren't important. What's important is it's linear.
But the aliens don't understand because he keeps trying to live in one moment.
If all you say is true, why do you exist here?
And so he can't explain the importance of time when all he does is live in this one moment when Jennifer died. And so the aliens themselves are representative of where Sisko is in his life. And so when Sisko moves on from Jennifer's death at the end, which is one of the best moments in all of Deep Space Nine, is when Sisko finally is able to grieve, given the time to grieve over his wife's death, because he was initially pulled from the Saratoga, unable to mourn over his wife in that moment. Here he's given the time to do that, and he grieves over her. And once this moment passes, once he has that grief, he leaves the wormhole, he leaves the aliens, he leaves that non-linear existence behind. And so it's a wonderful, wonderful way that the aliens weren't just an alien of the week. Yes, the prophets are going to appear in more episodes, but they weren't just an alien of the week. They were representative of what Sisko was going through in his own life.
Jake!
This episode is able to show us all of the major moments in Sisko's life, but they're able to show us not through flashbacks, but through the plot itself, either through the orb experience or through the prophets showing Sisko different parts of his life. We get to see the moment that Jennifer and Sisko meet. We get to see Jennifer and Sisko get engaged. We get to see Jake's birth.
Yes.
Linear procreation?
And we get to see what is obviously the most important moment in this episode, the death of Jennifer Sisko, and how Benjamin Sisko had been holding on to that for so long.
Damn it! We just can't leave her here! Oh! No! I never left this ship.
Yes, there are other things that occur in this episode, but these are the things that really stand out to me when I think about Emissary. I think about Avery Brooks, I think about his performance as Benjamin Sisko, I think about the character of Benjamin Sisko, I think about the beautiful moment when Sisko finally realizes that he's leading a nonlinear existence, and the wonderful way that he's allowed to grieve and then move past that grief to show the aliens how he and other humans live out their experiences, live out time, live out in a linear way. I love everything about this episode.
It is not linear.
No. It's not linear.
Emissary was the best way to start a Star Trek series. They have not been able to duplicate this since, and Emissary really kicks off what I think is the best show ever written. And so yeah, I'm going to talk a lot more about Deep Space Nine. There's lots of time left, lots of episodes to talk about. I think I've only talked about like 7 episodes of Deep Space Nine, so I'm going to get on that train and we're all going to take the ride. So I'm Rodney Donahue, and this is my celebration of the 30th anniversary of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. I hope you celebrate on January 3rd, 2023 by watching Emissary.